Hi, I'm Medulasa. This is Cathedrals of Sound, and if you've ever looked at a foul creature on TV and film and thought, LOL, same, this video's for you. So welcome to Cathedrals of Sound, a video series exploring the remaking of the Gothic in music for the modern era. This month, I'm exploring the philosophy of the Gothic from my own perspective as a composer, as a concept in general, and going into a little bit what this could mean for our new improved recipe Gothic going forward. I just want to state off the top that we'll be dealing with some fairly heavy topics around embodiment, monstrousness, and selfhood. So if that's not your vibe, feel free to tune in next time on the second Friday of October, where we'll be back in more comfortable musical territory. This project originally began as a challenge to see if my existential horror at embodiment and my love of the idea of the Gothic and what it could come to represent in music could be a way forward in creating a new subgenre altogether. When applying for the In Motion Artist Development Program with Sound and Music, who have graciously supported this project, I applied with the term Abjection as genre. Today we're going to look at what that possibly means, what the thinking behind the Gothic is as a concept, and why it shares roots with the concept of abjection, and what that means for our little project. So, what is the concept of the Gothic? The Gothic is a mode of art that can give us a framework with which to confront aspects of existence that transcend rational thought. This can include the sublime and the terrifying, the frightful and the ethereal, the intrusion of the past into the present, the weird and the eerie. In literary studies, the Gothic, particularly in its more horror-focused mode, is taken to be more directly linked to haunting. Some irrational spectre of the past has come to affect the rational present. However, I would contend that there are many more modes of the Gothic that are more expressive in nature, but still adhere to an encroachment of the irrational or other into the current societal context. The term Gothic in the arts came originally from its use as a pejorative against the Gothic architecture of the Middle Ages, from the perspective of Renaissance artists. According to Wikipedia, one of the first notable uses found was from Raphael, the painter, to Pope Leo X in 1518, and was subsequently popularized by the Italian artist and writer Giorgio Vasari, who used it as early as 1530, calling Gothic art monstrous and barbarous, and a disorder. Take note of the monstrous and disorder parts, because they're pretty damn important. Beyond the architectural, it took some time for the Gothic to be used in other art forms, and far more flatteringly, with what has been termed the first real Gothic horror novel in 1764, The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. In YouTuber and Professor Esoterica's discussion of the Gothic, Dr. Justin Sledge points out that the novel is built atop the Enlightenment philosophy of mind from Locke, the newly established mode of modernity, plus ideas of consciousness and phenomenology that were taking root in society. He goes on to state that the thinking of the time explored sensation as process and experience, and that an important part of the Gothic is the sublime, a sensation of beauty born of pain and anguish. The sublime is born from the tensing of the nerves, imaginations crushed under horrible immensity, the overwhelming power of nature in pure astonishment with some sensation of horror that robs us of conscious thought and activity. The Gothic is magnitude met with obscurity, darkness, gloom, confusion. Sublimity threatens to destroy. Vast structures, vast solitary nothingnesses, light itself can be sublime. Interestingly, Isabella van Elferen's research into timbre in music, a writer who's already written about timbre's importance to the Gothic in music, and who underpinned the previous Cathedrals of Sound video fairly heavily, also throws up this idea of the sublime. Like composers and music philosophers have done since the 18th century, I must resort to discourses of the sublime here, as there is no critical idiom in which to assess timbre. There are not even adequate words to describe it, nor is there a definition that is more precise than one ex negativo. Timbre is, in official musicological terminology, the difference between two tones with the same pitch and volume. Timbre thus is defined merely as something that is not something else, i.e. pitch and volume. She also goes on to state, a theorization of tone colour must start with the acknowledgement of the timbral paradox. Timbre undeniably has material as well as immaterial components. Its paradox, immateriality, engenders a sublime aesthetic experience that can be described as the aporia of being drawn into a void, which appears to be real, but which, the closer you get to it, flickers in and out of earshot and comprehension. Esoterica's video also outlines that the sublime itself is a natural terror. It is magnitude met with obscurity, darkness, gloom, confusion, mania, and obscurity. Sublimity threatens to destroy. No reason, no care, no restraint. Vacuity, vast nothingness. Humanity is meaningless in the face of the universe. Vast structures also inspires the sublime. But vast human structures stand no chance against decay, time, the violence of revolutions. All these things imply an outsideness of the order of what we take for granted in civil society. It implies an incursion of the other into perceived normality. Some element of the natural and unnatural that we would rather wish to forget. Something that is abject. The next and most important piece of the puzzle for both the standard Gothic and our new improved recipe Gothic is abjection. Although the concept partly predates it, it is generally recognised that Julia Kristeva's essay on abjection entitled Powers of Horror is the most important text on it. In it, she describes subjective horror as the feeling when an individual experiences or is confronted by the sheer experience of what Kristeva calls one's typically repressed corporeal reality, or an intrusion of the real in the symbolic order. It can also be taken to be where meaning collapses, causing the loss of distinction between subject and object, the self and other. It has been commonly used to analyse popular cultural narratives of horror and discriminatory behaviour in the social and political sciences. It's also important to note that it's often coupled with the idea of the uncanny, that which is foreign yet familiar, itself having deep ties to other related members of affect in this whole area of meaning, the weird and the eerie. The concept draws upon the French tradition of interest in the monstrous, and of the subject as grounded in filth. Kristeva developed her idea of the abject as that which is rejected by or disturbs social reason, meaning the communal consensus reality that underpins the social order or what we've all agreed upon as society. She states that it's not the lack of cleanliness or health that causes abjection, but what disturbs identity, system, and order. What does not respect borders, positions, rules, the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite. Since the abject is situated outside the symbolic order, being forced to face it is inherently traumatic. An example of horror. As with the repulsion presented by confrontation with filth, waste, or a corpse, an object which is violently cast out of the cultural world having once been a subject. The corpse, seen without God and outside of science, is the utmost of abjection. It is death infecting life. Michel de Certeau also adds, any autonomous order is founded upon what it eliminates. It produces a residue condemned to be forgotten. But what was excluded reinfiltrates the place of its origin. Now the present's clean place. It resurfaces, it troubles. It turns the present's feeling of being at home into an illusion. It lurks, this wild, this obscene, this filth, this resistance of superstition, within the walls of the residence. Some interpretations of Kristeva's work, for example by Mireille Astor, I'm going to pronounced that terribly, I'm sorry, posit that abjection is more a disruption of identity, a state of crisis. For example, existential isolation and alienation or extreme binary gendering could constitute abjection. Abjection can be a relationship to sets of systems, for example, religion. It relies on affect and opposes the subject because it threatens its identity, but it is also alluring because the subject also desires its meaning and becomes drawn into the place where meaning collapses. The abject here is seen as both fearsome but also deeply fascinating. In many instances, it is difficult to look away, and in fact would sometimes leave us wanting to see more of this ambiguous abject, the other, because of its effective power over the subject. It leaves a person with a certain jouissance, a sense of horror and pleasure. This intrigue is what gives impetus to the abject. This is the essential power of the abject in art, that it embodies an approach where disgust and horror also give some level of fascination and pleasure to the person experiencing it. The aforementioned Dr. Sledge mentioned in the video about the Gothic that the Gothic gives us some distance with which to play in and with horror in art, and that enjoyment of the macabre is made safe in some ways through the making of art with these ideas. It can also provide some level of camaraderie for those experiencing some level of abjection or horror in life, to know that their fascinations or experiences are shared. Ian McCormick outlined recurring links between transgressive desire, deviant categories of behaviour, and responses to bodily fluids in the 18th and 19th century discussions of prostitution, sodomy, and masturbation, relating to self-pollution, impurity, and uncleanness. According to both Kristeva and Powery, the abject can be considered as defilement or pollution, exclusion or taboo, transgressions and archaic resonances, corruption, the abyss, perversion, and narcissism. The abject is a liminal state of subjecthood and includes characteristics of repulsion. One prime example of abjection in art is the movie Alien, where monstrous representations of the female resonate with an abject, archaic figure of the mother through bodily dismemberment, forced impregnation, and how the nature of the alien itself can be seen as an encounter with the boundaryless nature of the original abject mother. Other prime examples include the performance art of Franco B, who has previously used bloodletting a lot in his performances to explore the body as an artistic object, and Andre Serrano's Piss Christ. I also want to relate the Gothic, the abject, and the sublime, etc., to the idea of the body in particular with this record. In literary studies of Gothic fiction, there is a term, abhuman, that refers to a Gothic body, or something that is only vestigially human, and possibly in the process of becoming something monstrous. In other terms, it's a body that is breaking down from its previously societally safe incarnation and transforming into something we would recognize as abject. Examples of this include vampires and werewolves. Kelly Hurley writes that the abhuman subject is a not quite human subject, characterized by its morphic variability, continually in danger of becoming not self, becoming other. In goth undead subculture, this is seen as somewhat actualized in the acceptance of gender variance and experimentation in the post-punk and gothic rock music scenes of the early 80s. Punk's ethos, its militant anti-sexual anarchy, was challenged by the Gothic's romantic obsessions with death, darkness, and perverse sexuality. Punk's carnival-esque but often rigid male body was supplanted by an androgynous Gothic body. Radical acceptance of the other, creating space for outsiders who felt unwelcome in mainstream society, is what goth and punk were founded on. The traditional societal view of makeup, popularized by women's magazines and talk show makeovers, is that it works as an accessory that either hides blemishes or accentuates women's features. Female goths took this idea of accentuation to an extreme. The total effect of such gothic makeup served to challenge and almost parody what a beautiful woman looks like. Through this hyperbolic use of stereotypically sexy clothing and the use of makeup, female goths were able to subvert gender stereotypes through an exaggerated femininity. This spirit of acceptance of those considered abject by society has carried in spirit through to today's club scenes, following a lineage of the club kid movement, who themselves were heavily influenced by the goth movement's approach to camaraderie with the other. So how do these factors relate to music in this project in particular? I'm hoping that by now you're seeing the threads that connect all of these aspects of the Gothic together, and maybe tied them to my previous video on the Gothic in music, and particularly with some of the ideas presented by Mark Fisher in his book The Weird and the Eerie. Abjection, the Sublime, the Monstrous do all have some factor of horror inherent to them, but they also possess fascination and jouissance. Fisher also remarked that his weird and eerie held a fascination with the outside, for that which lies beyond standard perception, cognition, and experience. And that fascination also contains some level of dread or apprehension, similar to the concept of abjection, but less based on horror. All of these ideas explore some notion of the other becoming recognizable, or some part of selfhood becoming othered. Music itself is a spectral force that constantly drifts across recognizable forces into something bigger or smaller than what we're used to, and never more so than deeply studio-focused music. Whether it's deeply altered vocal timbres, guitars and drums laden with so many effects to be virtually unrecognizable, or whether it's entirely new timbres created by electronic music. Studio-focused music has a level of abstraction that from our base reality that it can adequately express many of the discussed aspects of the Gothic in ways that we find both alluring and disgusting. My previous video explored some of the features as to how that happens in previous Gothic-related music, but my next video will take a look at some of the more unusual or developed compositional techniques I'm intending to use to truly embody the features of the new Gothic from the ground up. Join me next month on October 10th at 8 PM in UK time and 8 PM EST to find out exactly how I'm going to make this new Gothic genre. Thanks for sticking with me. This one's been a bit of a heavy one. I promise going forward that they're not always going to be so deeply philosophically heavy. I've been Medulasa. This has been Cathedrals of Sound. And yeah, enjoy yourself.